What is up, everybody? It is JJ Buckets here. Welcome back to the channel. And as you can obviously tell, because you're not blind and you have eyes, I am not alone today. So I will let my guest introduce himself.
What's up, guys? This is the Waraich Report. JJ, thank you for having me on here.
Yeah. Obviously, if you guys have been watching the channel, the Waraich Report isn't somebody new. He's somebody I love having on this channel, whether it be the roundtable or I think we've done like one or two collabs in the past in general as well. It's just always a good time. Like we always just have some good chats.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's been a pleasure. And it's always fun talking basketball with you, JJ. We make for some good basketball discussions.
Absolutely. And we're hopefully going to have one of those good basketball discussions today. So we were kind of chatting about it a little bit where Pascal Siakam, obviously is going to miss some time at the start of the season. So naturally, him being one of the biggest players on the team and obviously being a starter, there's going to be a void to fill. So the discussion for today is who is going to step into his starting spot? Who's going to kind of take the play time while he's obviously out. I think the reports are he'll be out for about the first month of the season is the latest that I've read about that. So at the very least, they're going to go a month without Pascal Siakam. And obviously there's some good candidates on this team to step into, his starting spot and make an immediate impact. I'm just curious, obviously, as to your opinion, then obviously I will give my own as to who that player is. But before we get into that, obviously gonna have to say it, like the video, helps it out a lot. Like it reaches a bigger audience, it gets it out to more Raptors fans. It's super appreciated every time you folks do it, and like it only takes a second. And if you're new here, subscribe to the channel as well, but also don't do it just for me. Head over to the Waraich Report. I will have his channel linked in the description of this video, and give him a subscribe as well if you like what he's saying. And even if you don't, subscribe and go in his comments and tell him why he's wrong. No, I'm kidding. Don't do that. It is very annoying. But with all that being said, I feel like there's a couple of good candidates that stand out to start at the 4 spot while Siakam's not there. Main among them, I feel like, are probably Chris Boucher, who's obviously kind of like the stalwart and the guy that's already been there. You have Precious Achiuwa, the exciting new, trade acquisition that the Raptors had. And then obviously we have hopeful rookie phenom, maybe phenom's a little strong, but you know what I'm getting at. Scottie Barnes, the man that Toronto has already just taken to so much and just already sent him so much love. So you got some good candidates to potentially fill that spot. Who do you think is the best fit out of the gates for the Raptors at the 4 spot starting off the season?
All right, JJ, before I talk about those, what about starting Malachi Flynn at the power forward position? We'll skip over the midget lineup, but no, I really obviously makes sense for Scottie Barnes. There's some player comparisons of him and Pascal. Me and you have both touched upon that, but I think Chris Boucher for me definitely makes the most sense when you talk about sliding another player in replacement of Pascal Siakam, because when you take a look at Chris Boucher, he's comfortable with the starters. He's played with these guys for a few years now. He's comfortable with Fred VanVleet. He's comfortable with other guys as well. And I think it makes a lot of sense in terms of what he's able to do as well. He's able to stretch the floor. He's able to be one of those players that doesn't necessarily demand the ball, which really benefits guys like OG Anunoby, Fred VanVleet, and also, of course, Gary Trent Jr. as well. They will have more shots to take. You don't want 4 or 5 starters in your starting lineup that all want the ball. Then it becomes a little bit of a messy situation. We've seen that with obviously the Celtics, where not everyone's getting enough shots. So I think having defined roles, and Chris Boucher knows his role. He's not going to be that egoistic. He's not going to complain about not getting enough touches. So I think he's the perfect candidate to slide into the starting position. He's able to stretch the floor. He's obviously able to block shots as well. And I think he just fits in so nicely with the starting lineup.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you're saying. I really like the fact that obviously with Boucher, you get that spacing. He was obviously a fantastic 3-point shooter last year. He can definitely do that. And obviously with his slender build, I think part of the issue was at times last season was that the Raptors tried to run him at the 5 when his kind of frame is more natural to a 4 spot. And he even kind of has a sneakily decent handle for somebody that's his size. So it's actually fun just watching him, create sometimes just off the dribble, which is really weird to say. I don't know, like just that doesn't sound like a statement that I envisioned myself saying about Chris Boucher a couple of years ago. But hey, that speaks to his development, obviously, and the development of the Raptors system in general. I do really like the fit there. I think I tend to agree to an extent. With Boucher, obviously, you get the defense and you get the rim protection, which is fantastic. You get the floor spacing, as you said. And you're right. I don't think Boucher is really somebody that has an ego. And I think, whether he's getting 4 shots a game or whether he's getting like 14 shots a game, I think he's perfectly content. And he is just a player that wants to affect winning. And I think that's the thing there, where if Boucher is starting, your immediate goal is just to be competitive and be as good as you could possibly be right out of the gate, because you're starting the guy that's just, well, what's the expression I'm looking for? Let's just put it this way. He knows the Raptors system well. He's obviously had a lot of time in it, and he obviously had his breakout season, so to speak, last year. Frankly, if the Raptors were a better team, you probably would have heard him a little bit more in like 6th man of the year conversations, maybe even most improved player conversations. He had a very good season last year, and I think starting him at that 4 spot, at least while Pascal is gone, will give him a chance to build on that. However, I do see an argument here for Scottie Barnes as well. And for the most part, I believe this is just something that really depends on the direction that you want to go with the team out of the gate. If you see this as a year where, you're going to be competitive, where you want to fight for a playoff spot, where you want to fight for maybe more than that, like a top 4 seed, I think Boucher out of the gate is the guy that you want. But if you're looking at it as, say, a developmental year and a year where you just want to bring guys along, make them better, have them grow with each other, I don't think it's the worst idea in the world to start Scottie Barnes. Just obviously for the extra reps, for the extra experience with the starters. And I also like a lot of the things that Barnes can bring to that starting lineup as well. In particular, obviously, I talked about this before. I will probably talk about it again. I still do think that playmaking is something they lack just a little bit in that starting lineup. Obviously, Barnes is a fantastic playmaker. We saw it in college. He has very good court vision. He's a good passer. So having that extra element at the 4 spot could be really helpful to, guys like, say, OG Anunoby, guys like Gary Trent Jr. to get him a couple of extra easy looks off Scottie Barnes' passing and playmaking. So that could be something interesting. And obviously, we know Barnes is going to be a fantastic defender in this league. No doubt about it. He was one of the best defenders in this draft class. So I feel comfortable in believing that he can step into, the NBA and be a very good defender on that end right away. So I feel for the most part, I agree with you in saying Boucher, but I think this really kind of depends on where the Raptors see themselves this season, where Nick Nurse and Masai and guys like that believe the direction of the team is and what the goal is for the season. If you just want to be competitive, if you want to rack up as many wins as possible, Boucher feels like your guy. But if you just want to grow the team and develop internally, you might want to look at potentially just getting Barnes in there and seeing what you got out of the gate and what needs development, and just get him some of the extra reps, extra looks, stuff like that.
Absolutely. You made some really good points there, JJ. I do want to quickly touch on one more thing about Chris Boucher before I talk about Scottie Barnes. Chris Boucher, now I'm not suggesting the Raptors trade him, but we do need to remember he is 29 years old. He's going into his final year of his contract. And we know the Raptors salary cap situation. They have essentially no room to pay someone 15, 20 million or even 13 million. And I believe he's making about 7 million. So if let's play a what if scenario here. If the Raptors want to trade Chris Boucher, what better way to do it than display him with more minutes, with more touches, increase his statistics? I'm not saying you do trade him, but much like how you did with Norman Powell, obviously that was a different situation because we had COVID protocols, but you saw how big of a step Norman Powell took when he was in the starting lineup. And maybe Chris Boucher, I'm not saying he's going to take that big of a leap compared to Norman Powell, but you're obviously going to increase your stats, getting more minutes, more touches. But also, I'm going to contradict myself here and go in the opposite direction as well. If you're going to start Chris Boucher, you're going to lose a little bit of bench scoring. So that's where the case comes in for when you talk about guys like Scottie Barnes starting, because we know Chris Boucher can get you buckets in a hurry, and you take him off that bench. Then you essentially have Malachi Flynn It depends on what we're doing with Goran Dragic. He's going to be there, but you have Scottie Barnes as well. You definitely lose that bench scoring as well. So it puts a little bit more pressure on the starters to score a bit more, play maybe a little bit more minutes as well. So I can definitely see where there's comparisons, or I shouldn't say comparisons, excuse me. I should talk about how Scottie Barnes would make a little bit more sense inserting into the starting lineup. And as you touched upon, playmaking is huge, and outside of Fred VanVleet, there's not really an essential playmaker outside of, obviously, Pascal's going to be out. So inserting Scottie Barnes into the starting lineup, you get two legitimate playmakers in Scottie Barnes and Fred VanVleet. It helps move the ball a little bit better. It gets the other guys more open touches, perhaps, and Scottie Barnes as well. Like I've talked about in the past, if there's one player you can compare to Pascal Siakam, it's Scottie Barnes in terms of his ability of what he's able to do on defense, his versatility. He's able to switch on defense, able to guard multiple positions. And like you talked about, he played the point guard position in college. If you need to play Fred VanVleet off the ball, you can play Scottie Barnes at the power forward position. You can have him handle the ball and create shots for other guys, So there's definitely a case to be made for Scottie Barnes in the starting lineup. But I'll send it back to you before I send out a few more points here about Scottie Barnes.
No, I like a lot of the points that you made. And honestly, I feel like the longer this discussion goes on, the more I just kind of sit there and just like the idea of Barnes starting more and more. I particularly really like your point about bench scoring, because Boucher is such an obvious go-to guy off the bench to get offense. I do think guys like Malachi can get their buckets off the bench, or hopefully assuming the jump that I believe Malachi will take this season, I do think he could be a solid spark plug off the bench. With that being said, though, I really do like that point that you made there, where if you move Boucher into the starting lineup, you're putting a lot of pressure on the starters to get most of the buckets, and then the bench to kind of just hold the fort, as opposed to having the bench be a game-changing element in itself when you have guys like Boucher coming off it and being able to put up buckets, obviously against lesser players being bench players. Whereas, if Boucher's starting, he's running against better players. And that's not to say that Boucher can't get his buckets against better players. I'm sure he can get a good amount of buckets on a lot of people. But I do really like that point there. There is also the interesting discussion as well, that I believe should be had, where we're talking about Barnes, we're talking about Boucher. Does Precious fit anywhere into this as well, in terms of potentially getting that starting spot at the 4?
Here's the thing with Precious. It's going to be one of those situations, much like how we kind of tried to play Chris Boucher at the center position last season. That's not his natural position. And yes, maybe 5 years ago, you could have probably played Precious Achiuwa at the power forward position. But the issue that I have with starting Precious Achiuwa in the power forward position is Khem Birch can't shoot threes. Precious Achiuwa, yes, he's shown the ability to shoot threes. And I know Khem Birch has obviously shown flashes of being able to shoot threes, but you're essentially going to have two front court players that are not able to stretch the floors. Heck, I wouldn't say Precious Achiuwa can't take a jump shot, but if you're relying on Precious Achiuwa to consistently hit a mid-range jump shot, I don't think that's necessarily a strong aspect of his game. So I think that's going to be the big question mark, is the floor spacing. Unless you're expecting Fred VanVleet, OG, and Gary Trent Jr. to just stand out there and shoot threes, it doesn't make a lot of sense, because we know they're going to drive to the basket and they're going to clog the paint a little bit with those two guys starting in the starting lineup. And again, I'm going to touch upon Scottie Barnes as well with that. You may have some issues with floor spacing depending on how you want to play Khem Birch, if you're going to have Khem Birch just standing on the 3-point line. So that's my issue with Precious Achiuwa. I'm not saying he can't be a starter, but I necessarily wouldn't start him at the power forward position.
Fair. I think with both those guys being Birch and Precious, we've seen flashes with Birch. It was obviously in the late run when he came over from the Magic last season to the Raptors. We've seen some flashes of him being able to stretch the court. And with Precious, I think we saw it a little bit in Summer League, where for my money's worth, just didn't look as raw. He looked a little more polished. He looked like he had a little bit more in his bag by comparison, obviously, to his first season in Miami, where obviously his playtime wasn't that great, because Miami was trying to be competitive. He was a first-year player again, and he was a raw first-year player, so he's obviously not going to get the biggest minutes in that situation. But I'm also trying to not overvalue, I guess, what I've seen in Summer League, because it is Summer League, and the level of competition that you're going against in Summer League isn't necessarily that of what you'll be facing throughout the regular season. I don't think that's a mystery. Like, I've seen so many people just get hyped over, what players do in summer league, and then they do absolutely nothing in the season afterwards. And it's just kind of like, well, think about the guys that they were going against in summer league. And again, that's not to say that some of what we saw in summer league from Precious can't carry over into the regular season, but I do see your point. It's one of those, I feel like with a lot of these things when it comes to the Raptors this season, and specifically with this discussion, I guess, but again, just on a greater level, is we've seen flashes of some things that are very positive. It's just about seeing it consistently. And I do tend to agree with you that when it comes to the spacing there, it might get a little just clogged up if you have both Precious and Khem Birch there as your starting forwards. Again, it's not like Barnes is a knockdown shooter or anything either, but at least with him in that discussion, you get that extra level of playmaking, which is going to get you shots elsewhere. And then obviously with Boucher, you do actually get that just spacing because he is a very good 3-point shooter, and you kind of stretch the court out a lot, which will hopefully open up driving lanes, open up mid-range buckets, all of the sort.
Absolutely. Yeah. I agree with the points you made. Again, with Scottie Barnes, I think it's a little bit more different because not to say Precious can't handle the ball, but I don't think he can necessarily handle the ball on the same level that Scottie Barnes can, so he's able to attack the basket. Scottie Barnes is very versatile. People would be surprised. Obviously, he can't shoot the 3-point shot, but he's able to do a lot more than people may realize on offense. So yeah, I absolutely agree with you, JJ.
So I feel like for the most part, we kind of started out with talking about Boucher taking that spot, but I also feel like we've been talking about Scottie Barnes a lot. So is there a change to the final verdict here? Do we still think that Boucher is the starting guy, or, is taking a chance on Barnes and obviously his ceiling and just seeing what he is out of the gate something that I guess ultimately is the call here? What are we saying? Boucher or Barnes? Who starts at the 4 on opening night?
I'm going to go Chris Boucher. And also just one more thing to know before I pass it back to you. Nick Nurse, we know how hard he is on his rookies. He's, I don't know if he'll start the rookie right away. He's always talked about, even last season when Malachi Flynn, there was I was watching some interviews and they talked about how Malachi Flynn was hitting 5 or 6 threes in a row in practice and everyone was shocked. And then Nick Nurse comes out and says, you don't want to get too high on the rookies. And I still remember Malachi Flynn was playing actually fairly well early into the season. But again, we know Nick Nurse, he's going to limit their minutes. Hopefully that's not the case with Scottie Barnes. Obviously, that's a different situation when you're talking about someone who's drafted in the top 4 in the NBA draft and then someone who's obviously drafted near the end of the NBA draft. So hopefully that's not the case, but I think Nick Nurse will start Chris Boucher. Personally, I would want Chris Boucher to start as well.
Well, I actually think you made a really good point there. And honestly, it's something that I feel like was kicking around in the back of my head and never actually made it out. I completely agree. And on your take in terms of Nick Nurse is usually a little more reserved when it comes to playing rookies. And, as an extension of that, yes, I agree that Boucher is probably getting the nod at the 4 to start the season and probably until Pascal Siakam comes back. Maybe if Barnes flashes enough out of the gate and, issues like, say, what you were talking about where your bench scoring is just really lacking or your starting lineup is just lacking that playmaking, just if it feels like a more comfortable fit to flip those two, maybe you do it at some point while obviously Siakam is still gone with the injury. But for the most part, I do believe that I'm on the same page here. I think Boucher is your starter on night 1 and probably your starter moving forward until Pascal Siakam is back from his shoulder injury.
Yeah, I agree. I think Chris Boucher makes a lot more sense. And that's not to disrespect Scottie Barnes. Scottie Barnes is an amazing player, but as we talked about, I think he's definitely coming off the bench as well. So
yeah, for sure. Oh yeah, none of this slander on Barnes whatsoever. We obviously think the world of him, and I think every Raptors fan is rooting for him to succeed just based off the kind of energy that he's brought to the team, to the city, to the franchise, just right off the bat. Everybody wants to see Barnes just turn into a megastar. Just maybe let's temper those expectations just right out of the gate,
Slow down just a little bit. So.
Yeah. All right. I think that more or less does it for us here today. What do you folks think? Barnes or Boucher? Who do you think should get the nod on night 1 for the Raptors? And who do you think actually will get the nod on night 1 for the Raptors if those answers change for you? Drop it in the comments below. We want to hear it all. other than that, I am going to thank the Waraich Report one more time for joining me here. It is always such a pleasure having him on the channel. Just always good chats. So if you appreciate these chats as much as I do, head over to his channel as well, hit the subscribe button. And obviously one more time, I'm going to ask you to hit the subscribe button for this channel. We love our Raptors here. And if you want to keep up with, people that love Raptors, and we'll talk about them consistently through and through, these are two great channels to do it with.
Thank you so much for having me, JJ. This was a pleasure.